Today on Walk with History, we're on location at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, as we talk about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968. So I'm Jen of Walk with History, and I am here today at the Lorraine Motel on 450 Mulberry Street, and this is in Memphis, Tennessee. It is now the Civil Rights Museum here in Memphis, Tennessee, but in April of 1968, this was a black hotel for segregation in the 60s, and this was a famous black hotel. Louis Armstrong stayed here, Joe Gibson stayed here, Nat King Cole stayed here, and Dr. Martin Luther King would stay here on occasion as well. So he was here in April of 1968 because of the sanitation strike. So what was the sanitation strike? In the 60s in Memphis, you had segregation when it came to working garbage. And garbage carriers were segregated in their trucks. So white garbage carriers drove the trucks, and black garbage carriers had to stay in the back of the trucks. And then in February, actually February 1st of 1968, two black garbage truck workers were killed, Cole and Walker. It was a rainy day, it was in the afternoon, and they were trying to take coverage from the rain, and they got into the back of the truck, and the truck malfunctioned and killed them. And that was it. African-American workers were fed up with the way they had been treated. They wanted better pay. They weren't paid anywhere near as the white workers. They didn't get uniforms. They didn't get time off. They didn't get restrooms. So they decided to go on strike. And if you've seen that sign, "I am a man," people wearing that sign, that's from the sanitation strike in Memphis, Tennessee. So Dr. Martin Luther King came here to support that strike.
You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs. Of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth.
And he had come here a couple days prior. It had gotten kind of violent. Someone had been killed, and so he had left, and he had come back here because he wanted to do a nonviolent march. But a judge had put an injunction on that no protests could happen. So Dr. Martin Luther King was here to lift that injunction. Here I am at the Church of God in Christ, and this is at 938 Mason Street in Memphis, Tennessee. This was built in 1940, between 1940 and 1945. It is where Martin Luther King delivered his last speech that I have seen, the Mountaintop speech, where he gives the foreboding line, "I may not get there with you, but I have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." It's such a powerful speech, especially since the next day he will be assassinated. So it's on April 3rd, 1968 that he's giving this speech. The place is packed. It's pouring rain. He doesn't think he's going to come here. He's at the Lorraine Motel, and he gets a phone call, and the person says, "They are packed. They're here to see you. They want to see you talk." So he's here in supporting the sanitation strike, and so he comes out here, and he delivers that speech. He walks into American history.
But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So here's the sign, so you can get a better look at the sign, Church of God in Christ. And I know there's a couple plaques up here. There have been some presidents that have visited here, so I want to see if I could find some of those plaques. I came here for the 50-year anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, and it was very powerful even then. So this is talking about, it's on the National Register of Historic Places, a landmark here. So this is the building, these are the doors where he gave his, I have seen the mountaintop. Mason Temple, built in 1940, restored in 1991. And over here we go. This is it. President Clinton came to visit, and President Clinton is the marker of a recognition of his visit. November 13th, 1993, he came to visit. And then it talks about Charles Mason, who was the leader of this church. That's the historic marker that is here. But this is the Church of God of Christ. So Lorraine Motel behind me, it was built in 1925. It's named Lorraine after the owner's wife. And in 1945, it was bought by that owner who named it after his wife. And it welcomed black travelers. It was in the Green Book. There was a swimming pool right here where these markers are. There was a swimming pool here. So behind me is the rooming house where James Earl Ray had stayed. James Earl Ray had checked in here 2 days prior. He's in a room that's, you can't see it, it's in the center of the rooming house. He actually shoots Dr. Martin Luther King from the second window over there. That's the bathroom. So he staked out in the bathroom and waited for him to come out onto the balcony. What's very interesting is James Earl Ray, the minute he shoots him, throws his rifle and everything on the bedspread, grabs the bedspread, runs out the door, and throws the bedspread in the doorway of the rooming house. Then runs to his Mustang, gets in his Mustang, and drives the Mustang to Canada. And everything is on that rifle. Fingerprints, everything that's connecting him. One shot, and it killed Dr. Martin Luther King. What's interesting about this case is the day after Dr. Martin Luther King is assassinated, the city comes out here and cleans all of the bushes and everything right behind the rooming house. And they want no physical evidence here. What's also interesting is right over here was a fire station. And that day they had sent every African-American firefighter home early that day. In the early 1990s, Dr. Martin Luther King's widow puts a civil suit against the city of Memphis against Dr. Martin Luther King's death. And in that civil suit, it comes out that there was a police officer, a Memphis police officer, who practiced the entire day before, April 3rd, 1968, in the range with the same exact rifle that was used to kill Dr. Martin Luther King. James Earl Ray is not known for accuracy. He's not known for being a great shooter. It's not like Lee Harvey Oswald, where we have pictures of his shooting in the military. So for James Earl Ray to fire one shot and kill Dr. Martin Luther King, it's very interesting. And if you look, behind me is the balcony where the wreath is set, room 306. And then he's coming out of, he's shooting from that second window there. So to make that shot, one shot, for someone who's not known for being a shooter.
What do you think?
So as we walk by the rooming house, let me tell you a little bit about James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray was arrested on June 8th, 1968 at London Heathrow. He is immediately extradited back here to Memphis. He pleads guilty on March 10th, 1969, and he's sentenced to 99 years in prison. He escapes in 1977, and another year is added on to his sentence. But right after he pleads guilty, there's a very interesting book called The Plot to Kill King, which I read in graduate school. I recommend everybody read this book. The coroner who examines Dr. Martin Luther King's body never does bullet trajectory. I thought that was so appalling that that was never done, especially with you have John F. Kennedy assassinated in 1963, and so much bullet trajectory was done in that case, where in 1968, no bullet trajectory is done on Dr. Martin Luther King. That cannot tell you exactly where the bullet is coming from. Is it coming from the window? Is it coming from the grassy knoll? Is it coming from a lower area? So because that's never done, they never will know. So on April 4th, 1968, Dr. King came out on the balcony of room 306. He was discussing the meeting they were going to have with the judge that night to get that injunction lifted so they could protest. And he was talking to some of his fellow followers, and he was telling him, hey, we're going to go out to eat that night and at a church, and I want them to play this hymn. I think the hymn was called Take My Hand, Precious Lord. He was speaking to Jesse Jackson when the bullet was fired at 6:01 p.m. Now, I was here for the 50th anniversary of the assassination. I sat right up there on the hill, right up here behind me, and they put a new wreath out, and they rang a bell. It was very moving. There was a lot of people here. I spoke with a lot of people with why they were here and what their connection to Dr. King was. But this was where it all happened. The famous photograph is taken from that balcony right there. And like I said, at the time, there was a swimming pool here. Dr. Martin Luther King is immediately taken to the hospital. The hospital no longer exists. It is where St. Jude now is. And he was pronounced dead at the hospital at 7:05 p.m. On April 8th, 1968, 4 days after the assassination, Coretta King will come here. She will march with 40,000 people and her children. She will finish the march that Dr. Martin Luther King had come here to do. And some of the famous pictures from this are actually taken by Ernst Withers, and they're here in Memphis at the Ernst Withers Museum. The Lorraine Motel today is a civil rights museum. It does a fantastic job of talking you through the civil rights movement, from Middle Passage to enslavement to the Civil War to Reconstruction to Jim Crow, lynching, and into the judicial system with mass incarceration that we have today. It is a fantastic museum. It has the buses on there from the Freedom Riders. It has a garbage truck from the sanitation strike. And they have kept the two rooms that he stayed in, 306 and 307, they have kept them to look like what they looked like that day. So if you ever get a chance to visit this museum, it is honestly one of the best museums I have ever been to. When the sanitation workers are striking here in Memphis, they're wearing these signs that say, I am a man, and you can see they have recreated some of those signs on front of these little kiosks here. These kiosks will play information. So if you're ever here and the museum's not open, they talk about what happened that day. And Dr. King will be laid to rest in his hometown of Atlanta. Ernest Withers will take some of the photographs of Dr. Martin Luther King. He's also famous for taking the photographs at the Emmett Till trial. He's also famous for taking the photographs of Emmett Till in his casket. But rooms 306 and 307. So some of my final thoughts as I'm here at the Lorraine Motel. The death of Dr. Martin Luther King did not stop a movement. It actually increased it. His voice was never put out, actually. It was heard tenfold. Who we think of as Dr. Martin Luther King today is not who Dr. Martin Luther King was in 1968. He has grown since then. His assassination has caused him to grow in infamy, and his dream to grow in infamy. And because of that, his voice was never silenced, no matter if his life was. On to my next Walk with History.